thank you very much for taking the evening to come and celebrate the 5th consecutive year of Positive Week. I'm very honored to first and foremost welcome you all, and secondly welcome this amazing panel. So thank you very much for being here today. We created Positive Week in order to celebrate those brands that not only create products and services with great care, amazing craftsmanship, but also looking after people and the environment. When I started my career about a zillion years ago, back in 2000, sustainability was probably one of those words that I needed to explain many, many times what it meant. So the conversation was like that. I've got a dodgy accent, so I'm glad that you guys kind of maybe sometimes understand what I say. I'm Argentinian, sorry about that. Secondly, I was trying to talk about sustainable development, and my previous business was called Clownfish Pre-Nemo, and we tried very hard in the beginning of it to integrate sustainability within the business processes. Clearly you thought I was not going to succeed, but fast forward, and my company was successful, etc., etc., etc. And sustainability today is probably one of the most overused, meaningless words that you can probably come across. So, how many of you know what sustainability means? Hands up. Okay, I'm gone and jumping. No, this is the norm. In fact, it means nothing to a lot of people because it's so hard to comprehend. However, the meaning of it is things that all of us care about. How many of you care about how products are made? How many of you care about the welfare of animals? How many of you would like to have more transparency about how business operates? So you all care about sustainability. Yet, you know, brands still today fear to talk about what they do. And this is because they feel that sustainability has to be about perfection. But in fact, it's about excellence. And this is something that we will basically explore today. So, there is no tension between responsible business and economic growth. This conversation is over. It's basically part of the same thing. Also, there is an opportunity between, you know, it shouldn't be fear. It should be an opportunity to communicate what brands do regarding this arena. And lastly, we need a new story, a new narrative, something somewhere in between catastrophe and utopia. And, you know, each one of you have the influence. I don't know how many of you have a phone. How many of you has Instagram, Facebook? Nobody? So we can change the story. We really can rewrite the narrative. And this is by influencing brands to do better and consumers to buy better. And not just us about the choices that we've made, but there is 2.5 billion consumers out there that actually can make better choices. That's what we do every day and while we get out of bed without coffee, literally. So who wanted to actually tell us a little bit more than this amazing panel? So Stephen Webster is jury designer, chairman of the House of Garrett, and of course Stephen Webster. Trinny Woodall is an unbelievable, you know, TV personality, author, and stylist. Julietta Dexter, CEO of the Communication Store and the founder. Laura, I can't remember, Jordan, fashion news and feature editor of Grazia. And of course, leading this panel discussion is Storm Keating, who is our brand ambassador. But before passing over to you, I just want to do a few thank yous in no particular order. The Communication Store for helping us with media and PR, the Luxury Channel, Bloomon Flowers, Pascal, Emmeran for our videos, and of course, my team in the UK and in South Africa for all the hard work. Thank you very much. Storm, over to you.
Can everybody hear? I almost feel like I need to hold this up, almost like a microphone, although I probably shouldn't have to. Can you hear me okay at the back? Great. Maybe we should just check everybody's mics before we get going so I don't interrupt the flow.
No, we can share.
Oh, you can share? Does that work? That's me from Trinny.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep. What? Turn. Oh, that would be good. I should work.
Yeah, you're this one. Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. So obviously it's Steve, thank you very much. We're all very honoured to be here. I've just had a lovely chat backstage with these guys and I can't wait to ask them some more questions so we all can delve into their masterminds. And just to kick off the discussion, how can we change the narrative when it comes to sustainability? I thought we'd start with Julietta because, as you know, Julietta is a PR guru and she's built an extraordinary company which is all about narratives and for some of the world's greatest brands. So Julietta, can I ask you, how do we, you know, change the narrative in your line of field, like when it comes to taking these brands and sort of communicating these messages?
I think the most important thing is to start with honesty and transparency and be clear that I'm not a PR guru. So I can go now. So I think that's the first thing most importantly. However, having said that, I do believe that positive, good communication can really be fundamentally powerful in evolving us and improving us. 8 years ago, I think now, I met Diana, who was founding Positive Luxury, and I had a goal then, which was to take the anger out and take the negativity out of this discussion. And somehow, we're very blessed at the Communication Store to look after so many incredible brands. Stephen, there's obviously room for you. Yeah.
One of your ex-employees.
Staff instead. But ultimately, at that time, I said to Diana, we've got to make this really sexy, desirable, exciting, and sort of aspirational. And she was like, you know, Julietta, when you walk in the room and you say the S word, people kind of sort of turn off. And I regrettably found that out to be true. Today, everybody wants to talk about this subject, and my goal is not diminished at all, but having tried this with brands, say, come on guys, you've already got to get on with this program. They're like, yeah, you know, we're busy, there's a boring AGM report that you can read over there. And now today, all the brands that we work with want to engage in this discussion. So I think that for me, it's about good, positive communication. It's about getting the right people in the room, having the right discussion together. It's not about angry, negative protest. I believe fundamentally that's been happening for many, many decades now, and it hasn't actually worked. And I think that actually this is now about telling the truth. It's not about talking about content and narrative and marketing messages. It's about having an honest conversation with consumers and creating products responsibly and then communicating them. So, Storm, just to finish up, it's rewriting the narrative to me is about communications professionals listening, not dictating the conversation.
Yeah, great. That's a great answer. Do you have any kind of inkling? Why do you think brands are hesitant, like, you know, to pick it up? As you said, you know, I mean, I know that I talk to some of my girlfriends and I mentioned sustainability and people don't really know what I'm talking about. We all know the word, but there seems to be a lot of misconceptions associated with sustainability. Some people think of, you know, people hugging trees and hairy underarms, and then you've got this other, you know, which is true, it's true, you know, that there's this one spectrum that's all the way over here. Then you have this totally other spectrum of intellectuals that speak a totally different language altogether, and then there's a mass body of people in the middle who just hear the words and they might read things in the press, they don't quite get it, and they know they should care, but they don't really care. Why is that?
I think from my perspective, just looking at the fashion side of our industry, the collective conversation I think is so important, because I think if we're really honest with each other, every single brand in the land somehow over the last 10, 20, 30 years has been maybe not getting it right. And I think the first starting point is to acknowledge that none of us are perfect. Nobody's got this ironed out yet, and we're on a journey together. What I've found with fashion brands that we work with is that they're frightened of putting their hand up because they're scared that their supply chain might be the one where things aren't quite right, and so alone they don't want to have the Daily Mail headline, you know, so-and-so said they were perfect, but actually we found a baby under the sewing machine of somebody in Bangladesh. And they're frightened of that. So what I would love is that we could collectively come together and say, everybody, we're in this together, we've all got to make slow, steady, positive, sustainable change and improvements together, and just come from the point of acceptance and acknowledgement that today we can all improve together.
Brilliant. And it is so hard with supply chain, especially for some of these huge companies and brands, to know every different aspect of it. I mean, I guess that's part of the problem. Trinny, we were having a little chat backstage. I know that you've got a beautiful daughter and you work a lot with women and specifically in fashion and beauty. I mean, what are your thoughts on the whole big scheme of the narrative, and when it comes to what we're discussing? Because you love Zara, you love Topshop. I mean, that's basically, the premise of what you stand for.
I mean, it's difficult because we're here talking about positive luxury, so that word doesn't really include high street. But my life is very high-low, low-high, whichever way you choose to look at it. And I think for me, it's, in a way, what you're asking, I think, is how do I educate my daughter into kind of good practices so that as she grows up as a woman, she can kind of question things and she can make her own judgments, but based with good facts. So it's how do you pass that message? And I don't know if I do pass it well to her, because I'm somebody who's, drawn like a butterfly to something new and exciting, and I want to tell the world about it. And it could be very inexpensive, or it could be very expensive. And, when I knew I was coming to this, and I was thinking, Diana, am I the right person to be sitting here? But I'm starting a beauty brand, and I think what made me very interested in this subject is, Juliette, you deal with many existing brands, and as a startup, you have an opportunity to decide what's your point of view going to be, because there's no rules that have yet been written that you have to undo, or things that you have to change in which to then be acceptable to positive luxury or another association. So, when we sat down with Diana, and I was like, oh, this is like Al Gore, and she went, no, this is this. And so then it made me go away and think, okay, I work with two main supply chains. One makes my physical product and the other makes my packaging. So, she said, just see how transparent that is. Does it go to a factory, which goes to another factory, and what is that factory doing? So I thought, okay, I want to do that, that's interesting. So just to see that there was a transparency, and I could see where that very first thing began, there was age 53, a new journey for me, because I hadn't given a shit before, to be honest. I really hadn't, because I didn't have a view. I didn't know, are the ice caps really melting? Al Gore irritates me. I don't have a strong view. But then there's this other side of me where, when I was thinking of my packaging, so certain things get instilled, which my daughter has got instilled. So my daughter will never, she'll sort her rubbish. I never sorted my rubbish as a child. It was so the simplest thing, when I was doing the packaging, she said to me, how much of it will be thrown away afterwards? She's 14. Wow. So that was quite interesting that she, and then it leads me to think, where did my education come from to have my views when I was her age, and where does hers come from? And it's two incredibly different places. So my education as a 14-year-old, I was sent to boarding school at 6.5, so we won't talk about that, but mainly from my parents and the few friends I had. But my daughter's is probably 60% from the end of her telephone and 40% from her home. And that's a very different way that she's going to absorb her information and make her judgments. And, she'll get her news from BuzzFeed. So what's BuzzFeed's opinion on this compared to my opinion? And that's how she's going to make her view. So there's a responsibility out there of not just parents, but just of how she's going to formulate her decisions. So, with my packaging, I don't want things people can throw away. I want it, and then there's a balance, because mine is in the luxury end. So you're talking about, you know, we're doing something online, so we're delivering something to people's home, and I want them to have this joyous experience. I love a new purchase, you know, what should I say? But I do, I love to open a box and it's wonderful, but I don't want to throw lots of things in a bin. You know, I do generally buy things I write about, but I've sent stuff. I occasionally have run out of something. I have a principle that I never take payment or write about things, you know, I just have this thing about it, and because I want to be honest and say when it's shit. So I then, occasionally somebody get my address, and then suddenly they send me all this stuff that I didn't want. And what I do, I just send it back.
Yeah.
I just, no, I didn't want that. Please don't send me that. But it comes in this huge packaging.
Yeah.
And this kind of huge bag with the tiny things inside. Tiny things like that really irritate me. And,
I'm an absolute shocker. I think, you ask my husband, our house is full of empty boxes. I mean, every brand, like even if it's Net-a-Porter, like everything that comes through the house, I save all the boxes and I have nowhere to put them. But I say, I know that I'm going to need that one day and I don't really want to throw it away. And it's absolutely, like what you're saying there is so in tune with what we're talking about, because it's making little changes where we can.
Yeah.
And things like packaging. And so you've gone with your beauty brand you mentioned. What are you doing with your packaging?
So we have recyclable on the bit that comes through that has to go. There's the bit that is plastic, which is the bit where if it's raining and you don't want to put through your letterbox, it has to not be nicked. So that bit has to be black plastic.
Yeah.
Okay. And then underneath is recyclable cardboard, and then underneath is a box you'll keep because it actually will turn into a jewelry box. And so that kind of is important. And then some other things come in, you can then use that in your handbag to carry around stuff.
Amazing.
So everything that we made had to have a second use. And then, you know, I had to look, I used, for example, certain ingredients. And I think, you know, we think here of leather and clothing, but, you know, Stephen is in diamonds and Juliette deals in a lot of cosmetic products. But, you know, for cosmetic products, I will talk about very inexpensive products, and, you know, I'll talk about some brands and I'll say, those are sold in China, and you know, to sell something in China, you have to do animal testing. You know,
Yeah.
I think Estee Lauder will sell in China. There is animal testing there because you cannot legally sell in China without animal testing. So, am I going to sell in China? That was a big thing. I had a huge potential Chinese investor. Okay, and I thought, am I going to sell? I love animals, so I couldn't do that. You know, that's my view, and I feel that. So I've got to go with my gut. And I think that, you know, going with my gut is the only thing I can go with, as well as coming and meeting people like Diana and being educated. And it's never too late to be educated. That's the job.
Absolutely. And I think you're probably the same. I mean, I'd be very similar to you. I came across, you know, started my journey after meeting Diana myself about 4 years ago. And most of us in the room probably came to a point where you just had one conversation with one person, and then all of a sudden it dropped like the penny, and there's a little bit of interest, and you thought, I want to know a little bit more. And your words, Trinny, you said you were drawn like a butterfly to it. Now, would you say that you're drawn like a butterfly to this now that you know that you could make these small changes in developing this product and it makes you feel so good inside? Would that kind of catapult your journey forward on this, you know, trajectory like further? Like, do you look at other things, like maybe you'll start recycling your bits and pieces now, like a 14-year-old? Would you say so, or do you?
I think it's interesting because I have I sent out this questionnaire to about 1,000 women at the beginning of when I started this idea, and I said, what's the most important thing to you in beauty, you know, in makeup? Is it the colours, the packaging, the organicness or efficacy, the whatever? And 4 out of 5 was the organic efficacy.
Yeah, right.
Okay, so because to them it was the colours or the packaging or the price point, you know, other things controlled their decisions. So unless you can level the playing fields in other areas, it can still be a challenge to make that your top choice. Because if you kind of are somebody on a limited budget, and I do a lot of, you know, I do telly and I talk about fashion for people who have a certain budget, so for them they'll go to some high street chains. And you know, we had a conversation in the green room before, because I am a transparent person, just about should we buy 5 things from Topshop or one nice piece. And you know, the bottom line is that for some people, the one nice piece is the one thing from Topshop. So you know, it's like every brand's got to have responsibility, and every brand's got to have a point of view. And I'm happy that I go into Zara and I see the right recycle bin now, and I see they're taking responsibility.
Lovely.
And I think that is it easier in luxury to do that? And I think that points of view, and I'm going to take your point, and I'd love Juliette to take it up because it's her original point, but it depends. Is a company a PLC or privately owned with the ability to make its decisions and be more nimble in changing things. You know, depending on how a company is run, depends on its ability as well to make its own decisions.
Okay, cool, great. I want to touch on, you mentioned your 14-year-old daughter. Laura, you work for Grazia, and you're a journalist, and you deal with Gen Ys and all the cool kids. What? Well, past that. So I'd be really interested to know, you know, your point of view, like just how influential they are, and you know, do they find sustainability cool? Like, do they want to read about it? Like, what's the narrative with the media?
I mean, I think that we're starting from a slightly more fortunate position than we were maybe a few years ago, when it did have that slightly worthy feel about it, you know, and it's a bit, sustainability was a bit like eat your greens. It's kind of something you know you should do, but you kind of would rather have a cookie, you know?
Yeah.
Maybe that's just me. I think now what I'm starting to realise with work I've done, not just with magazines, but with brands as well, is that how demanding the customer is, how demanding the readers are. I think in part that's born out of the fact that everyone's their own curator nowadays. You know, everyone's got their social media presence, and you know, like Trinny touched on it with her daughter. Like there's that access of information 24/7, and I think that certainly, you know, I feel like younger generations that really actually do care about these things, and I feel like that's not because it's in that do your homework, eat your greens way, but in a way that it's actually just cool. And like, for instance, that whole kind of Trumpian ruthlessness just seems so out of step. Actually, you know, like Browns have their Call to Be Kind campaign, and I think that there's an element of that, you know, and inclusivity, a democracy, and that does start with how we consume things.
And authenticity.
Of course, you know, like, you want to, I just feel like, this whole thing of like, you can't sit with us, of buy it and bin it, of all that kind of thing, just actually feels a bit out of step. So we're quite lucky that we're coming from that perspective now, but it's still, there are still challenges to it. I mean, a lot of the language around sustainability, I mean, look, like, we're all a bit, sustainability is such a blanket, boring term, but actually, you know, the language around it can be quite a turn-off.
Absolutely.
Like carbon dioxide, who cares?
Yeah.
It's true.
No, because we don't quite understand it. I mean, when people start talking, like, you know, in that language, it's not as accessible, is it really?
Exactly, and that's the problem, is trying to make it accessible without being, we're still being educated by, you know, still educating about it.
Yeah.
You know, no one wants to particularly talk about emissions, but that's all the things that count. And it's trying to make it a bit sexier.
Yeah, actually, and making it sexy, that leads me to you, Stephen. I love it. They're all just bouncing off each other. Stephen, if you're not aware, has done an amazing collaboration with an uber cool skater kid designer at Thames London. Do you think that that's changing the narrative, what you've done there with your jewellery designs and you know, working with him and the creative process and the messages that you communicate?
Yeah, I mean, it was a very unlikely kind of collaboration, I guess. I mean, you know, he's 19 and a skater. But I've known him since he was 15, if that helps. But he's a very interesting kid. There's no way I was just going, oh, you skate, let's do a collaboration. He's pretty amazing. He's like, he can play the whole back catalogue of the Smiths without having done a music lesson. And his poetry is really good. And he's an artist enough to get the attention of Damien Hirst. He's sort of like this 19-year-old, you know, and he came to my store and he bought, with his dad, he would hate to hear me saying that, but I know his dad as well, but he bought a ring and he put it on and he had that made like 10. And I was like, wow, that's amazing, you know, you've got a ring on every finger. Is that part of like the look? He's got a gold tooth as well, and obviously it was. And I said, I was looking at them all. I said, they're all vintage. He said, well, because, you know, I find what I'm looking for in like vintage shops. and he had one particular ring on that sort of had a bit of enamel in it, and I was trying to find what it was that you couldn't find in a modern jewellery that you found in vintage jewellery. And so we started this conversation, and then I said to him, why don't you come and have a look in my archive? Because I'm pretty old. my archive's vintage. And he did. And what was amazing was what he pulled out of it. So things that I would never have pulled out of my archive, I brought them back. And so we sort of, you know, I'm with my head designer and we're like, wow, you know, he's pulled that out and this. And then I started talking to him about, you know, when I was 16 and an apprentice in Hatton Garden, and for purposes that I'm sure everybody can kind of reason with, we used to make a lot of gold razor blades. And it was the 70s, and you know, I think my boss at the time, who was quite posh, had no idea that he was actually providing hardware for the drug industry. But we used to make a lot of these, and of course they were also, then they was adopted by the punks, and the punks, I was a punk, so, and talking to him about this, you could just see, you know, everything was registering with this kid. And so, you know, I sort of said, look, let's just do his collaboration, because I think we can come up with something really exciting. That's not for me that I've got to jump over there. I've got to go back a bit and bring it forward. And you seemed quite excited about it, and he was. And so we just took it from there. And I think the fascinating thing was when we sort of finally sort of made the announcement. This could have gone either way. It could have gone horribly wrong, or it just seemed to capture everybody's interest. So from like something like an ID magazine, which I would struggle to be included in these days, to the FT and to the Guardian, to everybody wanted to know about this collaboration. So of course it was an amazing thing to do. I don't know what I expected from it. I think I probably expected to just make some jewellery that felt right to me, that would talk to his generation probably, which it has done. But I was amazed by how everybody was fascinated. I mean, the journalist who came from the FT, it was like he was some sort of alien. You know, she was absolutely trying to get down. I could see by the way she was moving her hair as well. And she wanted to appear as cool as I was pretending I was. Next to this boy called Blondie McCoy. Anyway, no, it was absolutely brilliant. And he sort of did the job. I mean, I don't know what that's got to do with positive luxury and stuff, but in the end, of course, my brand is a very positive luxury brand. I mean, it's quite interesting listening to you talk, especially you, Trinny, about your anti-disposable sort of approach to things. And I mean, obviously, I've had quite a long time to think about this. I've known Diane about 5 years, so I've had that long. But I'm. You know, I'm in an industry where almost nothing is disposable. You know, I mean, by nature, you know, we work at a bench that has either a skin or a shelf, and nothing goes to waste. And so when you think about those things, it's sort of, that's already quite interesting, that you don't make anything disposable. You make things that stay with people for life, and often beyond their life, to someone else's life, you know, and going back to the vintage jewellery of Blondies. But I think, you know, the amount of people who come to me with things that were their grandmothers or whatever, and they need some adjustment, or they want to know how they can wear them today, and all those things. So that's kind of, I suppose, a nice part of my business. And then it got to, you know, the materials and where they come from, the modern ones.
Yeah.
And I think Diane caused me a lot of problems, actually. But we embraced it in the end, and we got there. And every single one of my suppliers has had to sign up to all of the boxes that Diana creates, and it feels really good.
It does feel good.
Yeah, it does, because I'm able to talk about it as a whole.
Yeah.
You know, so if I do a collaboration with that kid, he's already in my system. Yeah. So as long as he's ticking a box, I already tick the boxes. So it's a product that's very much, I suppose, in the spirit of the things that we're here to talk about today. And I have to say that with Blondie and talking to a different crowd, I've never sold anything to a 14-year-old before, but I don't know if that's good or bad, but you know, if they want it for Christmas and they've got to wear it all, their parents will buy it, that's okay with me. But I think that's probably a bit young. Your child's 15, is she 14, and she cares already. My daughters are older, they're 26 and 18, and they really care. So a 26-year-old is already entering into, you know, the world where they might be getting engaged, might be getting married, they might not be, but certainly is a client I've got to think about. And they are thinking about it a lot more than I used to think about it, but now I think about it.
And it's that, I mean, that's so brilliant, because, you know, it's obvious that the younger generations are on this. And you just said the words, you feel good. You know, now you feel really good about, you know, your jewellery and what you're doing. And that's obviously what they're getting on some level. Like, and we all do, like, we make the right purchase. You do feel good about, you know, supporting the brands that are doing better, you know, for the environment, for communities, or giving back in whichever way. So I guess when because for me it seems to be like, we all know if you get a little bit of a taste that it's almost like contagious. You know, you get on the bandwagon and you little step by little step. It's trying to get this message across, and we're going back to the core of tonight, which is rewriting the narrative. I'm going to come back to you, Julietta, because how do we, or what do you think brands can do to help get that across to the consumers, to everyday folk who don't know much about, you know, sustainability, but if they were to purchase the product, then they probably would get on the bandwagon because they just feel a little bit good about it, and it encourages them to keep buying. Yeah, the good brands. Sorry.
I mean, I think that first of all, the premise that I come from is that human beings love beautiful things, and therefore the communication, the narrative of deprivation, I think that because humans are iniquitous in some way, they like to have things, they're a little bit greedy. The minute I'm told that I've got to do the diet, somehow the cake comes back in the room. If there were no more diamonds, it's going to be an issue. So I think the message of you can't have this, you mustn't do that. And I think that another issue is that brands have sometimes tried to pass the buck to the consumer. I was telling Esther, who, you know, I'm really proud to say Esther Moore-McLaughlin has joined the communications store as our expert consultant in sustainability, purpose and responsibility. I now have somebody on the payroll that does that job. So I think that in itself changes the narrative. We also have a senior director of culture and values inside our business, so we're not just focused on a single bottom line. I think that's one big message that we could communicate as brands, is we're not just here to make a ton of cash out of you. We've actually got as Diana said earlier, a social motive and also an environmental one. So the language of deprivation for me is a major no-go. I'm going to make the assumption that I need diamonds for the rest of my life, and therefore how am I going to do that? Ultimately, I'd love to think that we could get to the point with people like Stephen who are doing it already, that I can walk into a shop where one diamond has been ethically sourced, socially, in terms of the people who've made it possible to have that diamond in Stephen's store, and one that isn't. And I think that I could talk for everybody in the room to say, I know which one you would pick. One that's caused harm and one that doesn't. And we need to get to the point where, to your point, Laura, that kind of the hokiness of the, you know, if you actually Google today ethical fashion, don't go there. It's not good. But actually just a simple BBC SEO campaign of one of the brands to really do this properly and own that space would throw up some beautiful products instead of sort of ugly ones. I also don't like the idea, as I've said before, of consumer-friendly language. That smacks to me of a company that doesn't really believe this, but they're putting a marketing veneer over the top. And fundamentally, I think that brands are getting much smarter now at doing it And it's not about the product and here, I'm flogging you a product. It's, this is a brand, these are our values, this is what we believe in. Do you believe in it too? If you need something, we've probably got what you need in terms of, I don't know, take Patagonia as a great example. Nothing new here, guys. Patagonia has been doing this since the 50s in the most authentic, credible, real way. Regrets, today for me, in luxury and fashion, the narrative of the brand, it's not high fashion, it's not luxury, it doesn't look fantastic. You wouldn't say, gotta have a Patagonia jacket this winter. But I think that's the next step for us, is to use incredible brands like Patagonia, who really are making extraordinary change, and dial that into the luxury piece. And as I was saying earlier with Trinny, I think it's through the mass market all the way up to the luxury sector. And I think that beautiful products, which, you know, my business partner Daniel sometimes says to me, you know, Julietta, we promote products that the world doesn't need. And I think that's true. Do I need another handbag? Probably not. There's over 790 million people that don't have clean drinking water. So I think that actually the luxury goods industry, which is a luxury as opposed to a human necessity, has got an enormous role to play in changing the narrative.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really well said. How about you, Laura, with the media and the narrative? Do you think that they have a role to play? I mean, should they be a little bit more responsible, or should they be promoting more articles about it? Should they be changing the language? What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we touched on it earlier, and I think that whole finger pointing, though, is quite off-putting. And I mean, we live in a sort of shame culture now, and I think that Julietta touched on it. If someone's trying, shouldn't we be look at what they're trying to do, rather than pulling them up on what they've not done? And like a good example for me with this is, I don't know if everyone saw, but there were some quite aggressive fur protests at London Fashion Week, and those shows weren't using fur, and a lot of the people attending shows don't use fur. We don't use fur at Grazia, but that kind of approach is just so off-putting that it made me think, well, fuck this, tomorrow I'm going to wear my mink. I don't actually have a mink, but you know what I mean? It's like fun, you know, I'm doing like, you know. So I don't want to be the equivalent of that in the media. I think what's also important to remember is people buy, like, I buy something because it looks nice. First of all, like, I don't necessarily buy it for that reason. I would look at that, but I'm not going to buy. I think that the brands have helped us in our job in that they've upped their game. So, for instance, brands like Reformation or Stella McCartney is a really good example.
Yeah.
These brands are just, you desire them, you like them, and then that is the bonus that comes with it.
Yeah.
And I think that has really helped us do our job. You know, repurposed denim, that's what everyone wanted to wear. And like, because they liked how it looked.
Yeah.
So that whole sort of idea of, and it's what we can help with is trying to shake off that connotation of a bit, you know, knit your own teapot kind of thing. And it's like, it's not really how ethical fashion is now.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's kind of like blending normalcy, making it normal, and making it cool by being attractive.
Yeah, so I think you can also be responsible with, like, in magazines, what you put on your pages. Like I said, we don't use fur. And I think that it should be positive language rather than negative language.
Absolutely.
I don't necessarily want to hear horror stories, but I'd like to know what buying, say, a Reformation dress, what that does for good, rather than what buying one that doesn't do those things, the harm that does.
Yeah.
Because fashion's about fantasy at the end of the day and escapism. And that's what's helped as well, is it's come into the luxury realm with things like the green carpet challenge. You know, it's like, you still want that bit of glamour. Why should you have to choose one or the other?
Yeah.
Glamour or social responsibility. Why can't you have both?
Have both. And that's what we need. We need to encourage all the brands and companies to get on the bandwagon so we can have both. And at all different price points, really. And collaboration, so going back to what you did there, with Thames London, Stephen, I mean, could that be another opportunity for designers and brands around the world? You know, is collaboration a really positive step forward for rewriting the narrative?
Well, yes, and you know, and I think it's probably quite proven it's good for business. You know, I mean, this sort of link up recently with LV and Supreme. You know, where there's obviously a desirability around the Louis Vuitton product, but when it sells out in, you know, an hour is because of Supreme, you know, and so I think that you can look at that, just say what's going to draw attention to what we're doing.
Kardashians.
And some of them make sense and some don't, and you know, we don't want to get into too much of that, but I just think it's probably, it's as much about, you know, sort of being able to shift and quite sort of radically, you know, that's tough for brands to do on their own, you know, because I know, for example, I know maybe about 5 or 6 years ago, you know, we had some market researcher come and we were sort of like, how do we grow, you know? And he came in the room and he pointed at me, he said, "He's your problem." Because everybody like looks at me and maybe not so much now, but they did, and they think that our brand's got to be a bit rock and roll. And that is it's just the way it is. Can't do anything about it. It's probably because in my industry, it's not necessarily full of people who are a bit rock and roll. and it's because of my life, you know. People look at that and then they assume that your products have got to be that way. And so you spend forever trying to tell people, no, we're not rock and roll. And they go, what? What are you talking about? Of course you're rock and roll. Yeah, but look at what we do. What does that mean? What's rock and roll mean? You know, it's like, all right, sometimes we can do some jewellery that's a bit rock and roll, but on the whole, it's not. Yeah. And so you know, and making this shift it's been almost impossible, you know. And I did my first collaboration I ever did was with a lifelong friend of mine. It was 35 years, Tracy Emmeran. And through collaborating with Tracy, I was able to capture some of Tracy, of course, you know, and turn it into jewellery. And you know, she's quite a challenging person. There's no question she's not going to let anything out that she doesn't think is that's got her name on it, that's not right for her. And so I had to take all that stuff on board because it's a collaboration. And we came out of a collection that, you know, I was proud of as a jeweller. But it allowed me to do things. I think you actually have a piece from it. I don't know if you would have got my jewellery before or not, I don't really care, but you got a bit from that. I started to connect completely differently with people. And so, yes, it changed my narrative, you know, and it allowed Stephen Webster to be looked at differently because of that relationship, you know. So I think for that respect, they're good for business. And, you know, just because I have to keep coming back to the positive luxury, my questions are not so direct, are they, about positive luxury? But I think it was also the first collection that we made 100% that fitted everything that was required by Diana and her team. And so that was very interesting as well, because it was very important. I think it was important for me. It was important that it was a capsule. It was already talking in a different way to my client and also someone who wasn't my client. And I could sort of proudly, you know, I wasn't on a soapbox about it, but you know, I could say this is as good as it gets as far as positive luxury goes.
Lovely. Well, I've just been informed we've got 5 minutes to go. So what I'd love to do before we finish up and we'll go to the floor for Q&A. Is ask you all what your positive luxury is. Who would like to start? Julietta. Oh, Laura.
Diamonds, if anyone wants to do this. My positive luxury. I think my real luxuries now are things that I buy and I continue to love. Because part of my job is probably also selling people who also don't need. And so I'm bombarded with stuff all the time. And I think that something like, even if it's just a great, the perfect grey cashmere jumper, or my watch is from 1952, like, you know, something that I just continue to go back to time and time and time again, and I still love, because I'm a fickle little madam, and I will usually go off something within about a day. So that is
mine are, just in terms of business, I'm really excited and happy, and it's definitely my positive luxury that I haven't succumbed to the corporate and sold the company to a big corporate that is going to tell me that I've got to show 20% margin all the time, which has allowed me to focus on the triple bottom line for 22 years. And that, as you were saying before, it makes me feel all right about myself and what we're doing. The second is my office, which I find as relaxing and inspiring and exciting as a fantastic walk in nature, and I need both those things in equal measure. And the third is wine.
This doesn't work, but it doesn't. Probably my positive luxury at the moment is time, because I have so little at the moment, and age 53 on my third career, I need so much time at the moment, and I need more time than is in the week. And I have a team of 8 people, going to be 12 people on Monday, mainly women, and it's to have the time to nurture those women as much as build the business, because at the moment I'm fighting for air to build the business, and I'm aware they need nurturing, and I want to be able to do both, and I can't do both right now, and I really feel it. So, and with my daughter to, she'll call me 5 times a day, and to not always say, can you call me in half an hour because I'm in a meeting? And it's things like that, and that's the more precious actually than any physical thing. And then it would have to be a ceiling coat.
I think things that are well made, actually. So things that are well made do tend to last. I've got a coat. I've got a Vivienne Westwood frock coat that I've had for 20 years, and I still wear it when the temperature drops. I get it out, get it dry cleaned, I get it repaired. I've had the cuffs done, I've had the pockets redone, I've had everything done in it, and it's my favourite coat. and I have to say, she did a great job. It's very well made. I never feel, I know you might laugh at me because I'm probably completely out of date anyway, but I never feel out of date in it. I just feel good, because it's my Vivienne Westwood frock coat. You probably have seen me in it, yeah.
Thanks, guys. All right, well, we're going to open up the floor. So if anybody has any questions, you can ask anyone individually or generally. Go for it, now's your time. Oh, yeah.
Right, so yeah, I have a question based on your perception and relationship to young people. I'm very much interested as well about what kind of young people feel about products that are on the market as well, even though they're not necessarily a target customer for a lot of you. How do you track what the younger generation is thinking about products, and what is your reaction to that?
Good question.
I'll do a quick answer. That do you want this? Sorry, yes. When I went for investment, some man who didn't give me money said, don't do this age group, you must do this age group. You must do the 18 to the 24-year-old woman. And people were very age-centric. And I'm bringing out a range, and it's for 18 to 80-year-old women. And many people say that in a brand, but all the women on my site are from my Facebook and social media who are my models, and they're all different age groups. And I think that I have people who, I think you kind of have a tone of voice, and it will either resonate with somebody's emotions more than their age. So I'll come across women, girls of 16 who are very unconfident about how they feel about their bodies, and they'll talk to me about it. And I have a woman of 60 who's going through menopause and talking about it. And to me, it's about that more than anything else. But the one thing I'll say is I've been working with a tech firm in Shoreditch for months, and they have a very different work ethic from me, and I've learned a lot from them because we were talking earlier, and I'm a workaholic, and I kind of, I won't notice when somebody's leaving the office, but I'll notice they're not there. And they'll feel a guilt of leaving too early for me, and it's up to me to appreciate or to be open to the fact that you can be really young and have a healthy work-life balance, which I think your generation have, and I noticed in this tech firm. But I also want to educate you in passion, enthusiasm, and really hard work. And it's sort of meeting in between. So how you speak to somebody who's a really different age group depends entirely on how you connect with them emotionally. And then I think the age is less relevant. I hate things that are age, put in a box about age. I think it's so damaging, because I think we all have equally, we learn cross-generationally.
I hope I'm going to be able to answer your question. We are a company of 180 people. I'm the oldest for sure. So there's maybe one, not sure. But everybody in the office is a millennial. And the old-fashioned structure of companies having the CEO and the most senior and the oldest person on the top dictating what everybody else says and thinks and does is gone. And all of our company organograms are the other way around, where as the CEO I'm right at the bottom, and we really listen to people. There was another survey today that went out in the company about modest fashion, and so we listen all the time to people in the company to hear what the next generation has to say. We also do quite a lot of social listening, so we're aware of what people are saying. And also, just the third point, because I'm feeling like I haven't done the mother thing, because I have kids as well, so I just wanted to get that. But I've got 2 children at university, and my eldest daughter, Valentina, is at college in Boston in the States, and out of about 500 or 600 courses, probably just under a third of those are to do with some form of ethical, environmental, upcycling, social point of interest, and her major is in sustainability in business and international affairs. So I think that the US universities are really ahead as well in really educating the next generation and bringing this front and centre, which I find hugely positive.
Great. There's another answer.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Have you heard that term perennials? And it's about it being more of a mindset than an age group. But I think it's such a perfect term, and it just came to me then when you guys were speaking. I think that perennial.
Is it like a hardy perennial flowering kind, or is it a perennial combination?
It's more like it's relevant, yeah. It's any age, I believe. But I'm not switched on millennial, unfortunately. But I was going to say, in answer to your question, I think that you can throw all the surveys and stats at it that you want, but ultimately the best bellwether for all of this is social media and what people are engaging with, and that's how you see it. I can't quite still get my head around, as a print journalist, the might of like the influencer, and I can't deny it, and it's huge. And I think that is just such a good, gives you such a good slice of what is actually going on and people actually feel.
Brilliant. There was another question. Yeah.
Hi, I wondered, what do you think is the luxury industry's perspective on the positioning of recycling and reclaimed goods?
Did you guys catch that? Sorry, I might need you to ask. Sorry.
What do you think the position of the luxury industry's perspective is on recycled and reclaimed goods within the luxury industry?
I think it's changing, and actually on Monday we were in Paris at a fashion industry. It's the collections in Paris at the moment, and we were invited to an event, and I wasn't sure whether it was going to be like A-list fashion royalty or it's a sustainability, it's all about renewable textile and fabric, and the kind of A-list wouldn't be in the room. And I didn't know when I was getting on the Eurostar what it would be, and it was definitely the A-list of the fashion world. And there were 5, 6 different renewable textiles, basically threads. One of them was to do with recycling polyester, because at the moment polyester eventually ends up in landfill. And it was really exciting to see that the world is listening, there was a huge amount of money in the room, and that the fashion industry, designers, Valentino, Albert from Lombard, everybody was in the room looking at how to use these recycled or sustainably, ethically produced. One of the textiles was out of spiderweb. So I feel very positive, Diana, this week, that the fashion industry is really starting to listen and feel hugely excited, and that the glamorousness that you were talking about is back in the room.
I definitely agree with that. I mean, you can even look at a lot of the brands. I mean, Chanel, I think, was it last year? I mean, they got stung with the greenwashing tag. But I was talking to Diana and some other colleagues about it, and people were like, oh, can you believe it? I said, yeah, but it's actually quite positive, because what that's showing everyone is Chanel wants to be associated as a green, positive brand. Even if they failed, which is obviously not ideal, obviously, but it was every headline across the world was writing about it, and it made it a conversation for everyone to discuss, and it proved that they wanted to be seen like that. So that only encourages and entices every other luxury brand out there, and the brands filtering down, to follow suit. So there's been a massive shift, especially in the last decade.
I was just wondering, in terms of how much the fashion industry produces in terms of quantities, and obviously I completely believe in recyclable materials and recycling, everything of ethical manufacturing, but at the end of the day, as designers, we're required to produce all these collections and produce. The stores are big, they need to be filled with product. And do you work with manufacturers or designers that are trying to rethink their calendar and deliveries, and maybe re-educate the consumer to go back to maybe an older way of doing things, because I think part of the conversation that needs to happen is that no matter how well we produce things in a sustainable way, there's just a problem of quantity.
Yeah, and you're right, and I think it's a really complicated issue that I think universally we're all trying to tackle. I mean, the fashion industry, I mean, across the board. That's really a complex question. I don't think anyone really has a quick answer to that. I mean, my personal view on that question, as well as just sustainability in general, from recycling in your household to riding a bicycle, is everyone has the power to do something positive. And you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to go vegan. You don't have to, not use any electricity in your household. But what we all do is if we all make a little change to our lifestyles, then in time, collaboratively, we'll make a big change.
But yes, and I completely agree. But I'm just wondering, especially maybe this question to you, Laura, since you're in the media and you're working around seasons and collections, I don't know if there's even if it's not perfect, a step to take towards, I'm not sure exactly what I'm saying, but it's like it's not perfect, but I'm trying to get to a certain point.
There certainly are brands now that produce more limited quantities, which is one way around that, and that also actually, I think, increases desirability. I mean, that Reformation is just the example that keeps springing to mind again and again. That stuff sells out because people want to wear it, but that's also to do with the amount of the recycled fabric they can get hold of. I think excess stock will always exist, but there's a question of what you'll do with that afterwards. Are you just going to send it off to a landfill and just not care? Or can you send it to a clothes bank, to a charity, for instance? And there are designers that do opt out of schedules, but that's also, I'm very mindful of the fact that that can be a very privileged position. A liar is the example that springs to mind, and he's obviously an absolute genius, but he has that liberty to be and luxury of being able to do that. Whereas I know that you have to sustain a business, so you have to meet certain calendars. But there are brands that are doing that, and there's more high street brands that are trying.
I know that we have to go,
Yeah,
but
sorry,
just quickly, I have seen a brand that has used the store as the experiential immersion into the product, but there is no product to buy. And at the moment, this is where technology could really, really help us a lot. Where you go into the store, you see the collection, you can try it on, you can have a lovely time, coffee, champagne, delightful, but you don't walk out of the store with anything because there's no stock in the shop, and that you're actually manufacturing on demand. So we're a little bit away from that at the moment, but I do think that will come. So you're actually only manufacturing when there is a consumer demand for it.
I work in trend forecasting, and that's kind of where I see the future going, especially with online retailing growing. And I hope that's where retailers will think.
Yeah. I've been, lots of waving hands at me as in we're over time. I'm so sorry. But guys, look, thank you so much. You've all been brilliant on the panel. I've thoroughly enjoyed it.